Welcome to Zinespiration, and I'm your host Craig, and with my co-host Ryan. Today we're talking with Iestyn. But before we chat with Iestyn, let's talk about what we have going on. Ryan, what do you have going on?
Well, Craig, as usual, you can go to pocketthoughts.etsy.com to get my new zines. The last two zines I made, number 19, number 18, starting to gain some popularity. This is getting real cool as always. Pocket Thoughts 11, my most popular one. Go get this one. Maybe it'll be the one that I kiss. Pocketthoughts.etsy.com. What have you been working on, Craig?
I've just released issue one of this new little series I'm doing, 5 o'clock in Tokyo. This is about my life in Tokyo and what goes on day to day. But that's enough about us. We are here, yes, with Iestyn, and I first was introduced to Iestyn through his zine, actually through the first issue of it, Emergency. How are you, Iestyn?
I'm all right, thanks. I'm all right. Quite excited about this, actually. I haven't done anything with this before.
We have a lot of fun
Yeah.
doing this. Sure.
Yeah. Well, I remember looking a couple of years ago, just before you guys started this, and there was like nothing on zines at all on YouTube. But you could find people making one pages, and that would be about it. So there's a couple of channels like you guys now, which is quite cool. So I try and stay in touch and see what people are doing and find out what's going on things. So it's cool.
Well, it's nice to have a little backstory to the people behind the zines, right? I mean, because sometimes I don't know about you, but I'll just once a month I go onto Etsy and I'm like, I'm going to spend $40 today on zines I've never seen before. I do it once a month, just so I get a different flavor coming in, something new to see and try. And I like to think that deep down every zine is a per zine. But still, it's nice to have that face to face and find out why someone made it and how they made it and what kind of propelled them to do it. So that's sort of why we do this. So, that's a neat little segue. Wink, wink. Why did you get into zines in the first place?
Do you know what? That's a funny one, actually. To be honest, I first did zines when I was very, very young. I'm going to go about 18. And I'd seen there was like a hippie shop in my hometown then, Newport in South Wales, and they had like little poetry zines and things like that, and I'd seen stuff in there. But the one that struck me was there was a guy just walking around handing out these little small leaflets, and I still have it. It's a thing called Fair Dinkum, and it was a little Christian thing from Australia about the Word of God, and I'm not Christian, but it just looked cool. Really lovely cartooning, nicely printed, simple thing, and it was funny, and I liked it, and I thought this is quite cool. And I read comics, so you kind of like fanzines and things like that. You may never have read them, but you know about them, And I just kind of thought, I like drawing. I'll do something, and I did a couple of things, and then somewhere I've still got one of them. But then kind of just didn't do anything for ages. And then I was at work, and I used to work in a place which was really, really awful to work at. And basically, for a while, my job was in compliance, and I kept finding things wrong, and they didn't want me to find things wrong. So they basically said for 3 months, you're not allowed to work at all. Just don't do anything whatsoever. That's quite hard. I'm going to be honest. Going in 9 to 5 and sitting there doing nothing is hard. You could only play online games so much before you're really bored of them. And I hate computer games as well. So I managed about 2 days of that. And I just started looking at things on Twitter and stuff, and looking at kind of comic people that I'd known about when I was younger. And then I saw a guy called Gareth Hopkins. So he's at GRTHINK, Gerthink, I always think. And he was doing these kind of weird experimental comics, which were sort of abstract. And I just loved the art on it. And kind of my imagination just went with that. And then one day I was really, really, really bored. And I kind of remixed one of the things that he'd been working on and pasted up. And it was quite fun. And then I just started sort of thinking from there about doing it. And then I started sort of looking into zines. And I saw 5 o'clock zines on Instagram. And I remember seeing Sea Green zines as well, with Nix. I'm just kind of thinking this is cool, and then just decided to start doing these things basically. But
Nice.
yeah, and it was quite lovely.
I'm kind of blown away. I'm blown away that you still have that that zine that guy gave you when you were 18. That's hilarious. But one thing I think that you're doing at the moment is you're doing these interviews or these reviews. Sorry, to with different about different zines and
Yeah.
what are you doing with that? Can you tell us more about that?
So I basically started up something because I'm perennially skint, to be honest. And it's only got worse thanks to sort of Brexit and lockdown and stuff. Post seems to be insane now. I sort of had a moment where I had some money, where I'd earned some stuff from something else that I made, and I thought, oh, I'll get this scene from America, which I really wanted. And it was £8 for the postage, and it was like $2 for the thing, and I'm like, I can't do that. That's just literally insane. That's all the money I had basically just to get something posted over, and I'm like, well, I'm not doing that, so I spent it on British ones instead. But so I kind of thought, I need to do something because I like this stuff and I can't pay for it, so why don't I just start talking about it and getting other people talking about it and kind of raising awareness in some way, or even just giving people feedback, because people like to get feedback. It's nice to hear stuff about what people think about your work. I tend to trying to do reviews, and I kind of trying to do things once a month at the moment. I went for a long time doing kind of recommendations and putting things up of things I like, but just even keeping to that schedule got so tricky because there's less time to do stuff, because evenings sort of tend to get taken up with work because the kids come home from school, and then you're with the kids. Don't really want to go, no, I'm busy, ignore me. Particularly more difficult because I'm in the living room as well. So when the kids are playing, it's not the best work environment. So I sort of focused a bit now. Okay?
I know that for sure.
Yeah. It's just so yeah. Lockdown's kind of one of those things that was interesting as well, because then people also just started making so many. I mean, there were just like this intense outpouring of really interesting looking stuff as well. I mean, it's sort of mad. I really could just have spent thousands of pounds on buying stuff that I like. And I'm like, one, my house isn't big enough for all this stuff. I would need a stately mansion for all the things that I like, And two, I'd need the bankroll to own a stately mansion to buy all the stuff. So I'm just going to talk about it and get the stuff out there.
I'm much the same. I'm much the same. It costs a fortune to get stuff over here in Japan from the US, because I think people feel more comfortable sending it through more of a registered post.
Yeah.
And it just, like you say, like a $2 zine costs like $8 or something, or it's just it's crazy. Like even it's understandable, but it kills the bank account.
Kind of to come back to what you were saying about not making, so trying to find a voice for other people. Is that why you also started the Facebook group there of We Love Zines?
Yeah, it's Zinelove Chat. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
That's all right. No worries. Yeah, I mean, basically, it's just another way of doing it, and I kind of like. It's nice to have a community where it's not just people coming in and selling stuff. And there's a couple of zine groups which are really good zine groups for that kind of thing. But I just thought, it's a good way of reaching out. It's a good way of kind of getting communication between people and getting people to know things that are going on. Just there's a nice group of people there now.
So what are some of those groups that are pretty good groups that you're? Do you know some of the names just for people who?
So there's Feminist Zines is a really good one. There's Zines Australia, which is a really nice one. Australia seems to have like just an amazing zine culture going on. But the weird thing is about the zine culture in Australia is you talk to people in Australia about how they have like this amazing zine culture, and half of them go, "Do we?" That's kind of like. Melbourne seems to have like a really great zine culture around that whole I can't believe it. Sticky Institute and the Festival of Photocopier side of things, that seems to be huge. But then there's lots of sort of outlying places, and Australia doesn't seem to kind of have that interconnectedness. And it's a shame because there's some really, really good zine makers who seem to not know anything about each other at all. And obviously
I
they've
think
got
it feels like a lot of it isn't online too. A lot of it seems very interpersonal, like personal kind of stuff. Like you say with Sticky. Like when I lived in Melbourne, I'm originally from there, kind of. I wasn't heavily into zines at that time. I was aware of them, of course, and I'd visited there a couple of times. But even that as a shop, it doesn't have a huge internet presence. Like, of course, it has, a handle and things like that. But yeah, the zine community there is very zine fests, sort of personal kind of face-to-face kind of community.
And that's what
Yeah.
on Zinelove Chat there is, it seems like every, 5 or 6 weeks or so, you put up just a little post. Hey, once again, who are you? What are you working on? Like, because I say all the time that, like, there's so many great creators out there doing stuff that don't know how to promote themselves and market themselves. So for someone to go, tell me what you're doing so that everybody can see it, I think is really important.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the key thing, is just to try and get and encourage people. Because, I was just looking at it, and there's 900 people nearly in that group. And I'm going to say there's probably about 100 that regularly contribute things,
Mm-hmm.
And I think 100 is great. I think that's brilliant but it's so interesting when you go and look at the profiles of some of these people, because I'm nosy like that. And that's kind of like one of the things that I do is and I haven't had a chance to do it for ages, but I just like to go in and just post up work from other people's stuff to give them the encouragement to kind of do it. But there was one, like the other day I did a post, where, in fact, yesterday, I woke up in the middle of the night and was kind of like, oh, it's 2 o'clock in the morning and I'm wide awake. I'll post this now. And it was interesting because there was this lady who is Brazilian that's living in Mexico and doing this graphic novel that she's working on about some bird cult. And the artwork is just beautiful, absolutely amazing stuff. I'd never seen it before, but she posted it there. And I think that's what's cool. It's just there's always the chance to see new. Sorry, just plugging my phone in because it's telling me it's dying. It's just, I love seeing things that I don't know anything about or that are different than what I like. I think that's what I like about zines, because they're so personal. You just get this sort of weird, crazy stuff that's so normal to someone else, And I think that's what's fascinating. I think for me, what I like about zines is often they're a view into other people's worlds, That's why I like about the Coffee and People ones that you did. Brilliant. I love that kind of thing. I love learning about, what's going on in Tokyo, or that's why I did the emergency side of things, because I know both as a dad, there's not much where people talk about being a dad and the kind of weird things about being a dad. Like, if you see a kid crying in a park, you don't go up and pick that kid up and give them comfort, because you're like, if I touch someone else's kid, it's going to get really weird with me, 50-50 chance of that, But then being a dad of a kid with special needs, it's weird, because I have to go into the toilet with him. He's 18 now. People give you really weird looks when you go into the toilet with your 18-year-old kid, And I just felt like people, it would be good to just say this stuff. One, it's just nice to get it out of your head. Putting things down on paper helps, I know people kind of talk about these things being therapy, but sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're just a way of organizing thoughts. You don't necessarily need to make yourself feel better about it, but you need to be able to think a straightforward thought about it rather than just a lot of mixed up emotions. And getting that out there and making that available to other people, I think that's really important. And I think that's why you see with zines, you see groups of people who are LGBT, and you see people who are feminists and things like that. It's just it's a network of people being able to contribute something without having to prove they're an expert or say they're an expert or things like that. They're allowed to have a valid opinion because they're them and they exist.
and they've often thought about it a lot. Like most, like people that are even non-zinesters, have often thought about what they're going through or what
Yeah.
the topic might be, or kind of subject, and then like you say, they kind of organize their thoughts by putting it on paper, and then they create this wonderful zine that they've had to also think about the cover, and the cover has meaning because it's not just some random photo or some kind of celebrity or something. It's a cover with meaning, and then I kind of think about, okay, what size do I want it? What kind of paper? I have to think about the paper. I have to think, it's every aspect, and it becomes such a complete kind of artwork.
Well, and they're real and unfiltered, right? So to go back to say your experience with your son, if you were to write a zine about being the father of an 18-year-old with special needs and how you have to help, like from your perspective, we kind of come along for the ride, and if there's a funny anecdote, we can laugh along with you with it. If you genuinely feel like, oh, this is really hard, we feel that with you. Whereas, let's suppose big publication decide to do a story about you and your son, it's saturated and filtered with a specific intent of making us, the reader, feel a certain way for you. And you get that with, say, the LGBTQ community, Black community, trans community. When you read, say, a zine made by a Black creator about racism, you feel that, and it's real, and it's how it's genuine, right?
Yeah.
Whereas if you read a People magazine story about racism in America, there's an agenda behind that story.
Yeah. But also it doesn't have, I mean, I think with the zine side of things, it's personal.
Yeah.
So, you can argue that what some big magazine has pulled together and generically said is too generic or has a political campaign. You can't argue against people's experience. You have to try and engage with that and understand it, And I'm talking about things like that. But I mean, the other thing of zines is there's some that are just nice that are silly and throwaway, And I think that's the thing, is there's the opportunity to do whatever you want. And I'm just thinking about, I've got a bunch of zines here. Have I got it? Yeah, look. I got a bunch of zines from someone in, I think from America. And these are really fun little zines, I like, I don't know if you can see this very well. Strange. Yeah. So what it is basically, she did this with her son. This is her son. And they cut out little bits and stuck them together. Can you see? Look, there's an aeroplane with a leopard, which is a bit weird. And then it's just basically leopards in weird places. And I don't know why, but just seeing that just absolutely tickled me. It just made me absolutely laugh out loud. There was something so funny about that idea. And it's not like you need to keep that. It's not like it's saying anything important, but it's lovely, And then she did this one as well, which, again, I don't know why it makes me laugh, but it does. Cats in hats. So she's taken photos of her cats and drawn hats on them. Highly appropriate, I feel. But I just think,
I might have seen that one somewhere, maybe online.
I just think when things stop having to be for a commercial purpose, you see some really interesting things, And I think that's what's nice about zines, and the way we can disseminate them, and then we can send those things on to people and stuff is great, I may not have to keep that. I can send that on to someone else and they can enjoy it, and it doesn't matter because they've seen it and it's there and it's existed. Some things you want to keep, some things you want to share. That's what's cool about it, I think. And the more we move into an online world, the less there is that kind of thing, I think. That's what I sort of like. Secondhand bookshops. You can find some weird things in secondhand bookshops, which you're not going to think about getting from an online shop because you don't know it exists. I have a book which is the cartoon history of nuclear power. Okay, it's hardback, it's cloth bound, it's about this size. It's from the 1950s, and it's got these little drawings of happy, smiley atoms and how they're going to save the world, and it's hilarious. And it's fascinating as well. I mean, the history of that's kind of weird. The first nuclear power plant they built online in an American campus. So it was on an American campus in an old indoor tennis court. And they basically powered it up by pulling out some rods and pushing back rods. And it wasn't lined or anything. And I'm like, that's slightly frightening. I wouldn't have wanted to be the people on that campus at that time. But you know, you don't know you want to see that kind of thing, do you? Because who's going to think that there's a book that tells you all about this stuff from them? But it's brilliant, you know. And I think that's why, and I think that's what's great about zine fairs and things like that is that, you know, I think that's what's interesting. Things about like the Zine Volcano one as well, which is another Australian one, isn't it? Which I think is run by the Sticky Institute, where you can sort of just order a bunch of zines that they've got in stock, and they'll send you a pack of them. You know, that's really interesting. I like the idea of that, and zine swaps. I know a couple of people have organised zine swaps. I've seen that and stuff as well. I just like the idea of that kind of thing. You bring stuff in and send stuff out. Also,
those zine swaps, they must take a lot of work. Like, imagine, like, Crash did a couple. There's a guy in the UK, Gordon. His name is Gordon. He does like doodles and stuff like that. He works for one of the print shops for t-shirts and stuff. And he does the big zine swap as well. I don't know how they organize it. It just sounds mad. Like sending a stamped envelope, and however many zines you send, we'll send you back. Like, I am not that organized to do something like that.
No, and I get less and less organized.
Right? Like, I could organize a zine swap because I'm very methodical in the way that I lay things out and plan and organize things. So I could do that. But also, if you see the desk where I work and create, shit's everywhere.
Yeah. And it's that bit where, you know, your kids see that thing that looks like black and white and really looks like a colouring in page. Yeah. And then you're like, yeah, now I'm sending some out with additional bits. Lizzie.
Well, honestly, there's I don't have it handy. I don't want to get up and get it because I'm lazy. When I did the Pocket Thoughts activity book, I think it was number 12 or 13, and it was all like coloring pages and there's mazes and word searches and stuff. So I was working on that. It was when lockdown first happened, and my kids were home with me for a week, and they were like, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "I'm making a coloring activity book." And they were like, "Can we color it in?" I was like, "Sure, let me just photocopy it. Here you go, color it." And the cover was in color, and I almost used my daughter's coloring of it for the cover because I was like, "Damn, she's better at this than I am."
Well, that's the thing, though. You do find I did one zine that I did, which I haven't got any copies of, annoyingly, was kids' art, and it was just of the kids' drawings. You know, apart from the back page. I remember there's a Nix one where I sent it to her, and I did send her a message saying, just careful when you look at the back. There's something on there that you might be quite surprised of, and basically it's a photo. I'm weird like this. I take photos of weird things. This is kind of possibly why I do zines as well. First time my daughter ever, my third child, second daughter, third child, pooed in a potty. I obviously took a photo of it because that's what you want to treasure. And of course, I put that as the back part. So she's showing the front page and she's looking right at this potty full of poo. Her reaction on the video is brilliant.
We must be kindred spirits because years ago I went to this like family reunion thing out in the middle of nowhere, and we were all camping and stuff, and there were some outhouses there for us to all use, right? So, you know, Friday to Sundays we were all there. So I get there on Friday, I go to the outhouse and I take a photo of the toilet. So I wanted a before, and I took a photo of the toilet before we left, so I could have a before and after of these toilets. What kind of damage we could possibly do with 50 people in 2 hours, you know?
Yeah, that must have been horrendous.
Oh, God. But it was beautiful at the same time.
But I like things like that. I just like walking along and, you know, seeing things. And I think again, zines are great like that. You can just bung a bunch of photos into a zine and send it out to people. You know, there's a great zine maker who does a lot of kind of like sort of cemeteries and kind of like broken down buildings and stuff. Livermore zine.
Artists, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Beautiful pictures.
Beautiful, but I find his work because I mean, Instagram's great like this. One of the things I like about Instagram is you can follow hashtags, and that's brilliant because you just stick in zines, and then you see sort of weird things pop up. And he was doing a competition, and he'd gone to the Museum of the Body in some Scandinavian country, and that was fascinating because they had like wax sort of versions of cadavers and things like that, including kind of like scrotums hanging down from the ceiling and stuff like that. And that was a brilliant zine. I love that zine. He's a great zine maker. He is, and he does some great collaborations.
He sent me a pack of stuff a couple months ago, and there had to be 5 or 6 zines. And you know, when I was trying to choose which one I was going to do a little video review of, I was like, how am I going to pick? I mean, obviously, I can't do the one about that's the comic strip about the guy who has sex with the corpse, because how am I going to show that off on Instagram without getting banned? Quick. But this was my favorite one to read. It's like, don't do this to me. But the photo ones that he had the cemeteries, and just like the contrast of the black and white is up really high, and it's like how to take something like death and actually make it soothing and beautiful. Like there's an art to that is so.
He's amazing. He's
Yeah,
amazing. And he's done so many good
was,
collaborations.
My favorite one was maybe the abandoned factory. It was kind of just recent. He went to an abandoned factory. It was absolutely
The
amazing.
Sugar Puffs factory.
It was, some of the rooms were like people just left it like 5 minutes ago. It was amazing.
So, given you've seen a lot, you see a lot of zines, right? Like, I mean, from running the Facebook group to being involved with the ones that you get and being involved in. What do you think is the future then of zines going forward? Because there's been that resurgence of them. At least it seems that people are, zines are back, even though they never went anywhere. But what do you think is the future?
I think people are going to keep making zines and small print zines. I think, one, because it's actually quite cheap to get things printed. If you want to get 20 black and white 16-page zines done, it's not going to cost you more than 50 quid. And I know that sounds like a lot up front, but I mean, if you're selling them for 3 quid, you don't have to sell that many to make your money back. No. It's not even going to cost you that, to be honest, probably. But, I just think people like that kind of thing. And I think the thing about it is there's more opportunity for things like zine fests and stuff. So I think the more these things open up, I mean, craft fairs and things like that, I think that's the kind of weird thing is that with Amazon coming along and kind of the high street shrinking, hand making things and selling things is kind of more popular than it's been, but having to organise and have things that happen to get that out to people is more popular. But I think people are more willing to go to it. I mean, certainly in Brighton, we've got makers fairs, we've got print fairs, there are zine fairs, I do think that owning something physical matters, Reading something on screen is different than something in your hand,
Yeah, I think just to jump on another one of those other threads that you talked about is, it was only a generation ago that the people were making their own clothes, and grandmothers were kind of like, it still happens. I'm not saying doesn't happen, but only about a generation ago when that was the norm, and then kind of consumerism came in. I guess, like you say, with your eldest child, so like kind of 20 plus years ago, 20 to 40, kind of that baby boomer kind of age, I guess. And then like people kind of had more money. And then now we've kind of in a different kind of period of time. And like you say, people are more willing to kind of, go with secondhand clothes, or even, like you say, zines. And that's kind of helping that have a bit more of a renaissance in the bigger world, not just outside of the zine community.
Yeah. I mean, I think it comes to do with that kind of acceptance of individualism as well, I remember growing up in the 80s no one wanted to be an individual. They wanted to wear Puma and Kappa and fit in, you know?
In the 80s and 90s, we believed advertising.
Yeah.
They told us what to wear and what to drink, and
Yeah.
hey, that's what we're supposed to do. And then I agree with you. Yeah, the 80s for sure, the 90s. I'd say maybe the late 90s, early 2000s, people started to really go, I'd rather think for myself.
Yeah, I think like little things become a little bit popular and then they can kind of get swallowed up over some of the bigger corporations. Like you said, kind of in the 90s, even like things like MTV was kind of worldwide and little like music shows, things like that. And then, they either get kind of too popular and burst or they just kind of get swallowed up over by the consumerism and then
Mm.
they kind of lose what they originally were. Um, and I think that's what's kind of happened, like Amazon and that like 10 years ago, it was kind of cool because oh wow, you could print your own book, you could
Yeah.
publish it, you could self-publish. And then it kind of gets too big for its boots kind of thing and just lives in consumerism and we kind of
Yeah. But then I think also,
is my sound going funny or
no, you sound all right to me.
oh okay. It just was humming.
I think there's a little bit of a compromise though. Like for instance, I always say I use Etsy because it's a recognizable name, right? And if someone's gonna buy my zine for the first time, they know that if they're buying it on Etsy, see the reviews and they see that I've actually shipped my sales out. So there's a trust with that, right?
It is a balance. I just think I'm not against having something that accumulates. I just hate the fact that they're so hyper commercial, these things, like Etsy. Etsy's not the friend of the people selling on there, is it? Let's face it, they will, you're not making a good living necessarily because they're going to take a lot of your money from that. And I think Kickstarter has helped a lot in that side of things. Kickstarter seems to be like a really again, Kickstarter then, there's been a couple of American things which I'm like, oh, that looks really cool, that's really cheap, and then you look at the price of the postage and you're like, okay, that's double digits just for the postage.
But also, I had a Patreon for all of 2 days because
Yeah.
some other teachers are like, oh, you should do a Patreon, and it's a great way to get an extra $20-$30 a month maybe in your pocket, right? And so I was like, okay, I'll set it up, and within 2 days, the whatever the system is that runs Patreon was sending me emails. Oh, don't forget to ask your friends and family to sign up for your Patreon to help boost your numbers up. I was like,
Yeah.
Patreon. I'm not begging anybody. Like, I'll get on YouTube and Instagram all day long and say, this is what I make. Go buy it because I think it's great. But I'm not going to go, hey, family, friends, can you please, help my numbers up? Fuck that. Go to fucking hell, Patreon. Fuck you.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that. I signed up to it, and literally the first thing was like, get your friends to sign up, get your family to sign up, get them to send stuff out. And I'm like, no. If I'm going to do that, one, I'm not going to put the money through you so you earn some bloody money from it. They could just give it to me, for God's sake, And I think that's the problem of the reach and the limit of these things. It gives you reach, but the limit is that there is a cost of that, And actually, sometimes I harp on a lot about APAs. And I don't know if anyone knows what an APA is, but it's an amateur press association. The idea was basically you used to have a central mailer, so one person who received stuff from a whole group of people, and it was usually about something really popular in the 80s in like science fiction writer circles, and also in kind of like sort of alternative sex kind of circles. You'd all work together, you'd all produce your own bit, you'd all have to send it in, and you'd all agree to do X amount of times a year. So it would be, say, every quarter, and you could only miss one quarter a year, or you were 8. You send all your stuff in, all your own photocopies, someone collects them all together, and then sends it out. And then everybody gets to read what's going on with everybody else, And they used to do it a lot with like science fiction writers. So there's a whole slew of people who, like Storm Constantine, I believe, was in sort of one like that. And they'd also, then people who weren't published writers, but they thought were good, could write and contribute, and then people would feed back to each other on what they'd read and things like that, I just think that's the kind of culture that I like, is that supportive culture, giving things back to people, getting feedback, the swapping kind of thing. I just like that. It's kind of like sharing and accumulating understanding. It may not be knowledge, because people might be telling you something which is factually accurate enough on a wide enough scale to be knowledge, but you're learning something about someone else's experience. You're seeing something which may be interesting. I mean, I know, so like Emergency, the reason I wrote something in Emergency rather than just did the photographs is because I read Ali Ray's War Glitter's Guilt zine. See, look, so this is me when your kid's in there and he's quite old and you're trying not to look at him going to the toilet, because that's not really a nice thing for either of you, and you've got an iPhone in there, you learn to do two things: take photos and turn the clicker sound off, because people give you really funny looks if they can hear you clicking photos whilst you're in a toilet. And
when you were just talking about that APA thing, I thought you were going to say that everyone sends it in, and then like it's printed into a book or something. I thought that's a really interesting kind of concept
everyone
as well.
They send their own photocopied contributions in. So one person will do, like, so if there's 50 people in there, you send basically 50 copies of yours in, and then you accumulate.
So it's like a big zine swap. Is that what we're?
It's kind of like a zine swap. Yeah, it's that kind of idea. But usually it's about a specific subject. So I received one once and an invitation to join up to it because I'd written something into a comic, and they were like, all of this was focused like on alternative lifestyles, centering around kind of like not gender, but kind of sex, but not BDSM or that kind of thing. They were like people who trained their waists. Have you heard of training your waist?
Yeah, I can imagine. I guess
you wear corsets and try and get your waist down as thin as possible, that kind of thing. And it was really interesting. I'd never heard of this idea before, and I was like, this is fantastic. This is just basically people, it's kind of like newsletters around the subject, and people just send it all in together and then share it out. And I just love that idea. The idea of that people would do that is brilliant. And I kind of feel like zines has got to a point where it would be really cool if we could just have like an accumulator site, where people, and there's sort of things like that where people have got historical things like that, where, so if you look at like the Poop Sheet Foundation, they've got historical records of things that people have done for mini comics, but it's not got the whole zine in it because they're worried about, people's copyright and ownership of those kind of things. But there's another one which I can never remember the name of. I remember the name of the guy that runs it, a guy called David Hathaway Price. He does UK fanzines. And he has the content in there. And that's fascinating because then you can flip through. I just love the idea of a site which accumulates it. And you can find things not because it's popular, not because someone's pushing an agenda, but because you search for something. Yeah, that sounds quite cool.
When you were talking, I just remembered that this is only some of them, but some guy in Japan actually through Salem Black in Canada, he sent me a message and said, I have an email of some guy who's living in Japan who's got a bunch of zines. This is a
Xerography Debt, yeah, brilliant.
which is just a review zine. And also another whole bunch of zines. He's like, he just didn't have the space anymore.
Yeah.
So he was just accumulating all these zines that like his own little library, and he just had to like move them on. So I was right place, right time, and actually lived just down the same train line, which was very nice.
Oh, that's quite cool. Yeah, I mean, I think that's what's nice about these things. And it's funny because you see the older zines, and some of those things are now worth a ridiculous amount of money. Like one of the Michael Moorcock ones, you can't get it for less than 90 quid. But then it was printed on like a Ditto machine. He did like 20 copies on. Do you know what Ditto is?
I don't think so.
Okay, so they were I don't know what they actually used, but when they printed out in purple. So they were like a machine where you could run something through and it would run copies through. It was like an early kind of version of a photocopier, or more like a Rizzo.
Ah, like a resale. Yeah.
Yeah, but this is way before that, and you'd be able to print images off. And it's the thing that was always purple, and it smelled very strongly of like a white spirit or an alcohol smell, you know. And they were kind of what they did the original. That's what you used to do original zines on. You'd hand crank them through, you know, and they print onto there and they take the images.
So it's like a
I think
what like I think I know what you.
there's a
Almost
guy.
like,
It's like a hand cranked printer,
like
an actual like a press, and you'd make yeah. But it's a tiny little one, so you used to be able to do it yourself. Like schools used to have them. In fact, when I was in school in the 80s and 90s, this is how well they lasted. They were still handing out the handouts, which they'd done on these things back in, you know, the 70s. How up to date was that stuff?
Well, it brings there's no right or wrong way to make a zine, right? Like, I mean, like we always assume that the photocopier or your own printer at home because it's convenient and it's easy. But you know, some Rizzo, the old-fashioned way like that. I think of like this that I've gotten from this guy Jordan Lee Tung, who does these. He writes each of these by hand, and he makes like 200 copies and he writes each one out by hand. I messaged him the other day going, "Man, your hand must be like friggin' killing by the end of the day." But like when we think of DIY and you know, real zine, like what's more zine than that, right?
Yeah. Well, even art books. I mean, there's a whole thing about art books, isn't there, with the handmade books, handcrafted books, and things like that. That's a whole other thing. You know, I remember with the
that's what I like about the umbrella of zines. You know, like you said, you know, the art books can go under them. It can be hand stitched. It can be hand printed. I made a zine once on this kind of nice card for the cover, which I printed. I hand printed every one of them, and but then it can be like this thing that I did that I've just got out recently. That's I made it the 7-Eleven. You know, I hand wrote it and then I printed it out for like 20 cents a page or something like that. You know, it's I think that's the umbrella of it. That it's amazing. It's fascinating. I think it can kind of go on forever.
Yeah, and I think that's what's cool. You know.
All right. Well, I think we've talked about like absolutely everything. Um,
I could
I'm
go on
not sure.
about this for
Is
years.
there anything else you want to cover there, Ryan? Or
No, I think good. We covered all the bases that we normally do. Super interesting perspective, Iestyn. Thank you so much. Love to hear a little bit of the history there that you bring to it too. That you know, that we don't always, you know, necessarily think of. Like I said, we think of zines as, you know, the photocopier and that. So it's always hear that other side of it.
Yeah, I just think we always think we're reinventing the wheel, don't we?
Yeah.
I think that's what's interesting about every generation. We always know better than the last one, and we're always the ones doing it the first time, aren't we?
So with that, we'll thanks for joining us, Iestyn. We've had a chatting with you. And if you enjoyed this chat, please click like, subscribe, and yeah, thanks very much.
Yeah, and all of Iestyn's details will be just linked down below. So follow Iestyn and find out what he's got going on. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.